Well, hello and welcome everybody. This is Stacey Murphy here from GrowYourOwnVegetables.org, and today we're talking about preserving the harvest, enjoying fresh food year round. So we're going to share 6 simple ways to stock your kitchen full of goodies to enjoy the flavor of summer all year round, even when it's cold outside. And we're going to share simple tricks because it takes less time than you think. So that's what this live class is all about. Welcome everybody. There's people here from all around the world, and I'm so grateful that you're here with us today. All right. So are you guys ready to get started? I know you are, because I've been seeing your comments already. So for some of you, this may be the first time that you are thinking about preserving the harvest. So you see the health benefits of fresh food and you'd love to enjoy it year round, but because you don't yet have firsthand experience with food preservation, it may feel a little intimidating getting started. And it's okay. I've been there. I'm going to share that story with you in just a minute. And you may be wondering how to know whether it's safe when you preserve your food. You know, are you going to hurt your family or your loved ones by preserving this food? It can be scary, and I totally get that. So I'm glad you're here learning some techniques with us here today. And I want to put those fears to rest because people have been doing this for hundreds of years. And you can do this too. You can master food preservation pretty quickly and safe techniques. There are safety precautions that have been tested and approved. It takes the guesswork out of the process, all right? Now, I'm guessing also for some of you, this is not your first time attempting to figure out all this stuff on your own. So how to preserve the harvest, right? So if you've been trying this before, preserving the harvest, and you feel lost because you've been buried in tons of zucchini and tomatoes, and you're really not enjoying the process because you're just buried in it all, you're definitely not alone. If you're gardening and then cooking and preserving all of your food, it's a lot and it can be overwhelming. I totally get that. So I'm happy that you are here as well. And now, I mentioned gardening. I should also mention that you don't need a garden to preserve the harvest. So take advantage of what's available at the farmer's market, and that can help you get onto the path of preserving the harvest for all year round as well. So there are a lot of people that join me because they already have a garden and they want to preserve that harvest, but you don't necessarily have to have your own garden. Farmer's market is awesome. And when you are preserving the harvest, you do want fresh food. So garden or farmer's market is your best option for preserving the harvest. You don't really want to preserve things that are coming out of the grocery store because they're not really as fresh. All right. But like I said, you don't have to have a garden. You can be going to the farmer's market. All right. So that's what we're here for today. If you're like me, you have this dream to grow, harvest, and eat your own organic vegetables and herbs, preferably all year round. And I'm going to show you how to make that happen during this live class. Okay, so my goal for this class is to help 2 types of people. For those who are beginners, you're going to gain an understanding of the different preservation techniques and strategies and which ones are going to work for you, because you don't have to do it all. So even if you're just learning how to cook and this is all new, cooking is new to you, you're going to get a great head start if you learn how to preserve the harvest. All right, you can do this. And for more experienced growers, you're going to discover a new approach to some of those problems that have been around for a while for you, buried in all of the harvest, trying to figure this all out. You're going to learn how to automate your process from harvest into meals so that putting fresh meals on your table, it takes less time than you think. All right. And I also have 2 intentions for this class. All right. So the only way for you to stress less about what's for dinner when you get home from a busy day is to have a pantry stocked with fresh, healthy options and fast, creative ways to put those things together into delicious meals. All right. I would love for you to put healthy food on your table. And a lot of us are busy, and healthy, fresh is oftentimes not what we think about when we when we have a busy lifestyle and we need something fast. But preserving your harvest is the way to that. All right. And so that's basically the second intention, is that the only way for you to have a pantry stocked with fresh, healthy options is to follow step by step a preservation system so that you can manage your time effectively. Because in this process of food preservation, It's not something that you just simply know how to do because you've eaten before, right? You don't know how to cook because you've eaten before. You don't know how to preserve the harvest simply because you've eaten before. And you certainly don't know how to plan your meals simply because you've eaten before. Meal planning is a great skill, life skill, and linking fresh harvest from your garden or the farmer's market to your meal planning, that is an art form. And that's something that I want to show you how to master. All right. So this is the cooking and life skills class that you wish they still taught in school so that every day could be simpler, getting that fresh food on your table. So now, I've trained thousands of gardeners on 6 different continents how to get the most out of their gardens with the least amount of effort. That includes teenagers all the way through adults. And what it also includes is a systematic approach to getting that food onto your table so you can enjoy all that homegrown health. Now, I had a big breakthrough years ago that showed me how to do all this. And that's what I'm really excited to share with you today. So everyone's reason for why they start preserving the harvest is different. And my reason is a bit unusual, but it's not completely uncommon. So I'm Italian, and my grandma had an Italian restaurant decades ago in Detroit. And her pasta sauce recipe was passed down to my dad, and then he passed it down to me. And when I moved to Brooklyn, I was experimenting with variations on her recipe, and I discovered a new twist that was so delicious. And my friends, when they tried it, they told me that I had to start canning this recipe. It was that good that I needed to start selling this recipe. And I told my family about it, and they were skeptical. They didn't believe me. They said, your recipe, it could never be as good as grandma's, because in my family, grandma's recipe is the gold standard. So we decided to have a pasta sauce contest, a smackdown, a cook-off. And this was going to happen when I visited and I went home for the holidays. All right. And everyone was super excited. Now, here's something you might not know about me. I'm kind of competitive, and I wanted to win this pasta showdown. And so this is how I got into canning, because I started thinking the secret to my sauce was a couple key ingredients from the farmer's market. And this was before I was gardening. So I was canning. This was my first attempt to can, and it was because of this smackdown, and I didn't have a garden yet. So the secret to my sauce was these key ingredients from the farmer's market. There were these specific varieties of vegetables that wouldn't be available in the dead of winter in Detroit, right? So I decided I was going to can a bunch of my sauce, my secret sauce, and surprise them with it already made and ready to eat. And so I shipped home this huge box. I told them not to open it until I got there. And then when it was time for the pasta showdown, my sauce was a huge success. So much so that my parents wanted me to show them how I made it. And they didn't understand where all the flavors were coming from. So we went to the grocery store, we bought all the ingredients, and we cooked a big batch together. But guess what? It wasn't the same. It was okay. But the key flavors were missing, the key flavors that made it unique, because the ingredients that you find in a grocery store are just not the same. So my family was let down because they were kind of hooked on this new recipe, and now they couldn't replicate it so easily because it was determined by the fresh vegetables that were coming out of my farmer's market. And that's when they made to promise me to make more next year and the year after that. And I heard one year, this is a story that goes down in history in my family, that one year there was this jar that was left over that they found in the cabinet that they didn't know was there. And they were all fighting over who got to eat it because there was only a couple servings left in the jar. And to this day, they still talk about that fight over who was going to get that last jar of this sauce. That's the power of fresh ingredients that you can enjoy year round. So this is why I got into preserving the harvest, as I realized how powerful it was to have those beautiful flavors of peak season right in your kitchen for year round, because it's different than what you get at the grocery store. Preserving your harvest, it's better than what you find at the grocery store. All right. So your garden is like the produce aisle at the grocery store, but the things that you can, they're like all those aisles in between, right? So you're creating your own grocery store right at home. So in this experience, or in this process, I had this profound shift. I realized how special these flavors are coming out of the garden, out of the farmer's market, and how the convenience of the grocery store has robbed us of those experiences. So the next thing I started canning was fruit, because I wanted to enjoy fresh peaches in the dead of winter. And I wanted to enjoy them without any added sugar. And you know what I like in mine is a hint of mint, which I can grab from my garden. So this reminded me of those fruit cups that my mom used to send me to school with. Now, those fruit cups, they came from the grocery store and they tasted kind of like candy. But I like fresh peaches. So here I was adding a little fun hint of mint to mine and creating something that I could enjoy for myself year round. And here's the cool thing is that when you get started preserving food, you start to realize that you get to make the rules of your recipe, and you don't have to add sugar when you're canning fruits. There are ways to can without adding cane sugar. And this is big for me for people. I don't know what your diet is, what types of things you eat, but for me, I don't eat any sugar. So this was epic for me to realize that I could enjoy these fruits year round without having to add sugar. All right. Now you're probably wondering, what does all this have to do with you? You don't necessarily have a family pasta cook-off to win. You maybe don't have, a hankering for peaches in the winter. But here are some of my students that are just like you, and they got started preserving the harvest in a class just like this. So this is from Becky. She says, I wanted to have a plan to plant, harvest, preserve, and especially plan meals in a way that was organized. After having spent countless hours surfing YouTube, trying to figure it all out on my own, I was feeling at a complete loss as to how to make sense of it all. So thank goodness you offered this course, and I was lucky enough to find it, to give her some organization, right? And then I happen to use all plant-based recipes. And so I'm preserving vegetables, herbs, nuts, seeds, all kinds of things, and meal prepping with all of those different things. So your plant-based recipes, use of herbs, and systematic methods to develop these habits have especially helped me get on track. I have more fresh produce coming to the kitchen, and I'm eating most of it. So this is big. You can get that food on your table, all right? So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. So before we get started, I want you to be looking out for a couple of golden nuggets that you can put into practice right away, all right? You don't have to do all of this at once. So here's what we're going to cover for the next 45 minutes or so. So we're going to cover these 3 secrets. So the secret number 1, I'm going to show you how to save 40% on your grocery bill each year. And it's pretty counterintuitive. Second secret is that I'm going to show you that in just 6 weeks, your pantry could be stocked year round with fresh, healthy meal options. That's not a lot of time to get a whole lot of food stocked up. And secret number 3 is that having a harvest preservation system, it not only helps you save time and energy preparing that food for year round, but it allows you to be creative. And I'm going to show you how to be a flavor ninja, putting together unusual ingredients for delicious and unexpected meals in just minutes. All right, so here we go. So secret number 1, how to save 40% on your grocery bill each year. So back before I had a garden, I mentioned that the first time I canned from the farmer's market to do my pasta showdown, right? I would go to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I would grab all my groceries for the week, and I would buy all of this gorgeous produce, and I would cook all week long with this gorgeous fresh food. And then Saturday morning would come around and it would be time to go back to the farmer's market for more food. And I would have this dilemma. There would still be fresh food in my fridge from last week. And it might look a little some of it might look a little wilted, right? Because it's been in there a week. And this would happen too when I was gardening. More food comes in each and every week on your plants, and you may not have eaten everything from last week, and then now you've got more food coming off the plants in your garden. And so, this is something that every gardener has probably experienced, is that you start to cook and preserve that food, and then just more keeps coming in. And then, there was times when I might forget about something in the bottom of the fridge. It would get buried and it would go bad. And you know what? That is really heartbreaking because, this is something that you may have grown in your garden, took time and energy to grow. And now it's not looking so hot in the bottom of your fridge. But guess what? This is not, something that is uncommon for people. This happens to everybody. So if this is going on for you, if you find that there are things at the bottom of your fridge that are sometimes going bad because you forget about them or you can't keep up, this is totally normal. It's also like the worst feeling in the world, right? So it's easy for things to get lost in this process. And on average, this is a statistic from 2012, but I think it's pretty accurate still today. On average, Americans throw away 40% of their food each year. We're some of the worst offenders. Like other countries are not this bad, right? And, how much of that is produce? That's a lot of food, and that's a lot of groceries going to waste. And we all see this happen from time to time in our own homes. So I noticed this problem of always something at the bottom of the fridge that I would forget about because there was so much awesome new food at the market that I wanted to cook with. So things, would go bad. And I thought to myself, what if, wrong slide. So what if a simple solution was, what if I simply buy 40% less at the market? It seems like a reasonable idea, right? Just buy 40% less, it solves the problem. But the strangest thing happened. Somehow I had the exact same problem the next week. Smaller percentage because I had less total food, but there were still things that went to waste. So what was going on here? And I realized something in this process. I've been programmed by my mom to always have a stocked fridge just in case, to always have something there to prepare. And so I am wired to never have an empty fridge. All right. And so a lot of us are wired this way, that we're also wired to go for the freshest food that we see. And that means that the things that are less fresh, they get less and less fresh until they don't look so hot and we end up throwing them away. We're wired this way, right? And so the other thing is that we're wired that an empty fridge is scary because that's our security, right? That's where we get our food. So it makes sense psychologically that we want to know food is present when we need it, right? It's our basic security as a human to have food to eat. So we're wired to go for that best looking produce and to cook that first. So I decided to do something really drastic in this process. I vowed to completely pull out everything in the fridge every week, no matter what. Pull it out, decide what to do with all of the perishable items. Now, this fridge looks pretty scary to me, like there's nothing in it, right? And maybe it looks pretty scary to you. But what I realized is that if I simply preserved those things that were left behind, simple ways, it wouldn't be like I had an empty fridge at all. I'm just simply moving it from the fridge to where it's going to go bad fast to other places where I can keep it. So whether I'm moving it to a pantry shelf, whether I'm moving it to a freezer, we'll talk about a couple different options here in just a moment. So what I did is I started preserving just a little bit of food each week. So this is how I got started. I started canning pasta sauce, and then I started preserving that little bit of food that kept going to the bottom of my fridge every week so that I wouldn't waste it. And one of the reasons that people don't get started preserving the harvest is that they think about canning. And they think that to preserve, they need big batches, large batches to make it worthwhile. But it's simply not true. You can get started with some small, simple things with just those couple of things that are at the bottom of your fridge. Now, another thing is that people wonder, like, is it really worth it to save wilted greens? I'm going to show you it's 100% worth it. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. And then the other thing is that people get held up sometimes with the preserving the harvest process, that they're like, well, I'm waiting to preserve these whatever, fill in the blank, because I'm waiting for X to grow in my garden and I need all the ingredients here together all at once in order to make this perfect recipe from my garden. Well, guess what? Nobody's perfect. So you don't need every ingredient to come out of your garden. Why not go to the farmer's market, pick something up? And I've even gone to the grocery store for little ingredients. Like, let's say I can't find my dill anywhere if I'm making dill pickles. I'll go to the grocery store and I'll find the most perfect dill I can find. And I don't sweat it too much. I'm like, all right, let's do this. Let's make sure I preserve the harvest for later. You don't have to have every single ingredient. First, It's great when it comes out of the garden. Second, when it comes from the grocery store or from the farmer's market. But if you have to pick up something from the grocery store, you can still do that. It's just, it's not where I would start. But if you need something to fill in a recipe, do it. Because it's simply not true that you have to have every ingredient come fresh out of your garden to make the perfect recipe. Because guess what? You're also adding spices that might come out of your cabinet. And those things didn't come out of your garden either, right? So, this is what happens because people, they think of canning first, right? And when you're preserving the harvest, yes, I would say canning makes sense in large batches, because if you're going to take up all of that time and energy to stand in front of a hot stove and you're going to turn the oven on and use that power, then or gas, then I would say big batches make the most sense, right? And that's where I got started with my pasta sauce. But that's not necessarily the best option for those things that are going to the bottom of your fridge, all right? So there are 5 other ways to preserve the harvest so you can enjoy that food year round and create healthy meals with those ingredients that you're preserving. So I'm going to share a couple with you here that you can do for those leftover pieces. Now, before I go on with those other techniques, I did want to mention something about canning because this is really important. With canning, I would say this is a place where you want to know safety first. So if you're thinking about canning to preserve your food for later, of all of the different food preservation techniques, this is the one that has the most food safety precautions. So you want to make sure you follow recipes to the T. All right. So there are places where you can find recipes. So you want to pay attention. And, people have been doing this for hundreds of years, and you want to pay attention to the most recent guidelines for safety. Some of the older techniques are no longer deemed safe. So you want to stay up to date with safety precautions. And one of the things that I teach in my classes is there are some substitutions. So people say like, oh, if I'm canning and I have to use these recipes, that sounds boring. I have to use the same recipe all the time. Well, here's a couple things. In my classes, I share with you, there are a couple of safe substitutions, and I talk about how to substitute safely. That's something I talk about in my longer classes. I don't have time here. But the other thing is that, think about this. This is kind of a pro tip here. So if you're canning and you're thinking, oh God, I have to eat the same pasta sauce all year round because I'm canning the same pasta sauce, one of the things you can do is when you actually do bring it to your table, that's your moment to modify it. So you heat it up and you can modify it after you cook it again. So the things that you preserve in your cabinet are staples. You can always modify them to make amazing meals and have creative substitutions. All right. All right. So let's go back to that food at the bottom of your fridge, because that's how we started, right? And we want to figure out how to save that 40% on our grocery bill, the things that are at the bottom of the fridge. So I have a couple tricks up my sleeve for what I typically do with these items. So one of the first things that I did was start dehydrating any of those greens that are wilting, because those wilted greens are 100 times better than anything you're going to find at the grocery store. Now, I'm not talking about like when your greens start to turn yellow and they start to smell funny, but I'm talking about a little wilted. Those greens are going to be better than anything you find at the grocery store. They're still chock full of nutrients. So one of the first things I did was start dehydrating those greens into powders, and then I could take them with me on vacation and I could put them in smoothies, because here's the deal. When I travel, and I generally have a plant-based diet, and sometimes, when you're out on the road, it's hard to find healthy options. Maybe you're in the middle of nowhere, there's no healthy restaurants. Wouldn't it be nice to have a spoonful of powdered greens that you could add to whatever you're eating to enhance not only the flavor, but the nutrient quality of that food? If I go to a restaurant, I can order a vegetable soup and I can pour in dehydrated greens from my garden, a spoonful, and I can get a little flavor from my garden right at a restaurant. So I travel with this. I blend them up in smoothies, whatever it takes. This is my way to take anything that's wilted and put it to great use. And I have a dehydrator. It's easily accessible. And basically all I do at the end of each week is I pop in any of those greens that are wilting, and I set the timer, walk away, and they they dehydrate. And then when they're done, I simply grind them up into a powder and take them with me wherever I go. And imagine all those B vitamins that are present in your greens. You can take them with you because powdered greens are so lightweight, so easy to travel with you, and they're very healthy, right? Now, if you have a bit more time, you can make green chips. You can make green chips out of anything, out of kale, out of Swiss chard, out of beet greens, out of collard greens, out of broccoli greens even. Any greens that you have, you can make some fun green chips and you can flavor them. If you have a little bit more time, instead of just dehydrating them, this is one of my recipes that you see here is a kind of vegan nacho cheese flavor, and it's a lot of fun. People love it, and it's a couple minutes to whip up a batch and pop it in. So it takes a little bit more time than just dehydrating, but very doable. And this stuff will disappear off your shelf so fast. So oftentimes when I have a lot of stuff at the bottom of my fridge, if I dehydrate it into some sort of thing like this that I think I'm going to put on my pantry shelf for later, guess what happens? Everybody in my house eats it like that. So this is one way to help everybody get their greens, their daily greens, in a really effective way. And it takes care of that stuff at the bottom of your fridge, right? Now, second way that you can take care of some of that stuff at the bottom of your fridge, there are some vegetables that you can just simply chop and freeze. And some of them chop and freeze better than others. So you want to know which ones. All right. So two vegetables that do really well, just simply chop them and freeze them, are bell peppers, or even hot peppers. I like to dehydrate more so than chop, but they would work too chopped up. So peppers and onions, you can just simply chop them up, put them in freezer safe bags, and they're going to freeze wonderfully. So if those are left over at the bottom of your fridge, or simply when you bring them home from the market or from your garden, simply chop and freeze them so that when it does come time to eat, you just pull them out and they're already batched and ready to go. All right. Now, this is a great shortcut for those of you looking for a tomato shortcut. So oftentimes in the peak season, people are like, oh man, so many tomatoes. What a great problem to have, right? And they don't know what to do with all the tomatoes. They don't want to necessarily can them all because they don't want to stand in front of a hot stove. Well, guess what? Canning, because you're cooking and basically those tomatoes are going to get all mushy anyway, you might as well just freeze them. Just freeze them whole. And then when it's time to make a soup or make a pasta sauce or make whatever, just pull them out and basically you're ready to cook with them. So this is a trick if you have freezer space to simply chuck them in there, and then at a later date, you could either can them or use them. All right. And a pro tip here. Pro tip, are you ready for this? So if you're pulling your tomatoes out of the freezer, and what you're going to find is that when they thaw out, they're going to be a little watery. So you're not going to use a frozen vegetable in a salad. It's just not going to work. But what you can use them for is cooking. And so with tomatoes, they sometimes get a little bit watery. So if you want to make a salsa or something and you don't want it to be wet or too watery, what you can do is you can chop up those frozen tomatoes, and as they thaw, put them in a strainer, allow the juice to settle out, and then basically you have the pulp in the strainer and you have the juice underneath. And what you can do is you can use the pulp to make salsa and soups and anything that you need the pulp for, and then you can take the juice and you can make fun tomato juice drinks out of it. All right, so it's good to separate that out so that they don't get too watery. All right, so the reason why you that not all vegetables are great for freezing is essentially that the minute you pick a vegetable, it's still alive. Those cells inside the vegetable are alive. And the minute that you pick them, those cells start to realize that they're cut off from their water source and their food sources. And so what happens is that enzymatic reactions start to happen in that plant, and it deteriorates the food, not just the texture, but also the flavor. So when you're freezing, there is I'm going to pop in the chat box here a quick guide for you with some of these different techniques. So what I talk about in the quick guide is pros and cons of these different techniques. So there you go. There's the guide there. So when you're freezing as one of the different options for food preservation, one of the things you want to do is what's called blanching. And I talk a little bit about that in that quick guide. It takes a little bit of effort to do that, but it does give you the best possible flavor and texture if you're going to use that at a later date. If you don't mind about the texture, then you can always just freeze it. And if it's going to get ground up into a soup, no problem. But you might also lose some of the flavor as well. So this is something to pay attention to, that not every vegetable is good just chopped and frozen necessarily. I do recommend experimenting for what works for you, because everybody's a little bit different on this one. All right, so that's 2 ways that you can take care of that produce at the bottom drawer that's going to waste. The third way is quick pickling. So this is something that's super fast, easy. All you want to do is take everything, all the vegetables and herbs that are in your bottom drawer that are starting to look a little, you're like, oh, they're getting a little neglected down there, and there's new food coming in this week. What do I do? Quick pickling is a great thing to do. So basically, you simply throw your vegetables and herbs and some spices into a jar, any size jar, doesn't matter. And then what you want to do is basically heat up some brine, 1 part vinegar to 1 part water, and pour that into the jars, put it in the fridge, and it'll be ready in about 24 days. And every jar is different. Every jar can taste different depending on what vegetables you put in and what herbs you put in. So this is something that you can just take those odds and ends and mix and match and make beautiful flavors. All right. And I'm going to post one more link for you here in the chat box. So this here on the screen are zucchini pickles that I made, and I have a recipe book for 3 zucchini recipes. So I'm going to post that here in the chat box for you now. And I know zucchini is one of those things that a lot of people have extra of, and you always want to know what to do with that extra. So there's 3 zucchini recipes, and one of them is quick pickling for zucchini. So you can learn these 3 recipes here, which is like a cardamom dandelion root on the left. There's an elderberry hibiscus in the middle, and there's a dill pickle on the right. So check out those recipes. They're really delicious. And you can create whatever you want out of whatever's at the bottom of your fridge. And one day, one of my favorite recipes I ever made was because I had a lot of fennel left over in the bottom of my fridge and radishes. Put them together in a jar. I quick pickled them, and I discovered they taste amazing together. So that's now a staple in my kitchen. All right. So keep in mind, and here's that book, what that book looks like. So you'll see that in the link in the chat box. So keep in mind with all this, this was all about learning what to do with those, the stuff that's at the bottom of your fridge. All right. And so keep in mind that there are 6 ways to preserve the harvest, and you don't have to try everything all at once. So we just went through canning and dehydrating and freezing and quick pickling. And the 3 that we talked about for saving on your grocery bill, the dehydrating, freezing, and quick pickling, those are things that are going to help you take care of what's in the bottom of your fridge. All right. So here's the deal. You're going to try one thing at a time, learn how you like it, master it, and then move on to the next thing. Because if you try to do all this at once, you might give up. All right. So we're going through a lot of this really quickly. And so yeah, I can't stress this enough that you want to just try one thing at a time. All right. And do something daring. All right. So I want you to do something daring here. And at the end of the week, pull everything out of your fridge and take what is not looking so hot and decide what to do with it. Quick pickle it, freeze it, maybe dehydrate it. And you don't necessarily need a dehydrator. You can also bake those kale chips if you want. That's another way to get your kale chips or your dehydrated greens. So there's pros and cons to using your oven versus a dehydrator, which don't have quite enough time to go into that right now. But do something daring. Pull all of that out of your fridge and do something with it so you can save that 40% on your grocery bill. All right. Okay. So you're simply just moving that food into your pantry or into your freezer or wherever the case may be. All right. So let me I have to grab my next set of slides here. Hold on one moment. Okay. All right, so that is secret number one. And let's move into secret number two. All right, so in just 6 weeks, your pantry could be stocked year-round with fresh, healthy options. Think about what that would mean for you. And no, I don't mean canning and standing in front of a hot stove and pickling nonstop for 6 weeks. So here is a quick story just to give you an idea of what's possible. All right. So I used to do certain catering gigs and pop-up restaurant gigs in Brooklyn. And I got to work with some really amazing chefs in New York City. And once I was working on this amazing menu for a fundraiser at the farm, and each chef was taking one of our vegetables, creating a dish around it, I decided I wanted to create a recipe to showcase our cabbage. May not be the sexiest of vegetables to pick, but I love cabbage, right? So I wanted to do something that would feature the cabbage. And this was a big event. My dish was going to be next to all these different awesome chefs' food. So I really wanted to test my recipe first, make sure that my concoction was awesome and could stand up next to these other dishes. So one afternoon, I decided I just shredded a whole bunch of cabbage, whole bunch of other vegetables and herbs, and I made 12 quarts of various sauerkraut recipes. And I wanted to try different options to see how the recipes would taste when they were paired with those other foods. And some of you might be thinking, sauerkraut doesn't sound very fancy or very interesting at all. And I get that. I used to feel that way as a kid, actually. But part of the mission of this fundraiser was to raise awareness about how fermented foods improve your gut health, because these foods are alive. They are nutrient dense. They are called cultured foods because they are alive. And some of the health stats for fermented foods are staggering. About 40% of diseases, they are linked to bacterial imbalances in the gut. So these fermented foods, these sauerkrauts, are what help us have a balanced gut. And in general, when people start to get excited about fermented foods and they start to feel the difference in their body of what it feels like to have that kind of health, for me, when I eat fermented foods, I get a clarity of vision. I have a lot of energy. It's a big difference for me. And the people who ferment food are a little bit zealous about it, right? And so this is something that people are getting very interested in. And also for people who are interested in peak health for their family and for their loved ones, they use fermented foods as medicine. So the other thing is that sauerkraut doesn't have to be boring. So these were not your typical sauerkraut recipes. Among my favorite was something that came up when I was on the farm. I looked around the farm and I saw rosemary, I saw lemongrass, and I saw plums. And I said, that sounds amazing. Let's do that. And so I put them together in a dish. I did 12 different versions of different sauerkrauts. So this was just one version. And the fermentation process, it varies. But after about 14 days, I knew that I had some winners with these different sauerkrauts that I had created. And here's the thing that happened, though, is that these were test runs. So all of this was basically cabbage that I had grabbed from the farmer's market. And so I didn't want to harvest all the cabbage because I was basically running tests. So now I had to actually make the sauerkraut from the farm to feature the cabbage that we had grown right there on the farm. So now I had 12 quarts. So on the screen here is one of those quart jars. It's hard to see the depth of it, but a quart jar is a nice size. I had 12 of these quart jars, and they were all different sauerkraut recipes. And I had them all to myself because they were extra. And so here's what I learned about myself in this process. I did all of this in a couple hours on a Sunday. So what I learned about myself is that I love putting a dollop of sauerkraut on everything. And basically, I went through all that sauerkraut, all 12 quarts, in about 13 weeks. So that's a little less than a quart per week. And so, like I said, I like putting sauerkraut on things. This is sauerkraut on my zucchini burgers. And what I recognized was that about 25% of my plate, typically in every meal, even for breakfast, I know I'm a little bit radical on this one, but even for breakfast, 25% of my plate is fermented food of some sort. And so here I had created 13 weeks worth of fermented foods in just a couple hours on a Sunday. And that means that if you tally all that up, this is crazy when you do the math. That means that I could create all my own sauerkraut for the year in less than 8 hours each year. That's incredible to think about. How easy is that? Now, I'm not going to necessarily do all that 8 hours once and then save it for the whole year. I can spread that out across the course of the year, right? But here I am, 25% of the food on my plate is taken care of in just a couple of hours. And you've probably spent 8 hours cooking all week long for lots of different meals. And here I produced in 8 hours, 25% of my typical plate for the whole year. Pretty incredible. It's mind-boggling. So have you ever run the math on the staples that you eat? So your staples will be different than mine. Yours might not be sauerkraut. You might have other staples. So what I would recommend that you do is think about the couple staples that would make a big difference in your life, things that would put fresh food on your table all year round in just a couple hours. So here's a couple things to think about. How many jars of pasta sauce would you need for the year? I'm Italian, so I always think in terms of pasta sauce. You might have a different staple, like salsa, like something else. How many zucchini burgers do you need frozen for the year? So I eat a lot of, I'm a plant-based diet, so I make my own veggie burgers. How many do I need frozen for the whole year? How long would it take you to create that and stow it away for the whole year so that it's ready whenever you need it? And so, like I said, I am not sure what your staples are, but it turns out that if I create large batches of my staples, I can stock my pantry with most of them if I spend about 8 hours on 6 Sundays in a row. So for 6 weeks, 8 hours a Sunday, I can stock most of my vegetables. I can tackle most of my preservation goals in that time. It's incredible. But generally, I find it much more enjoyable when I spend just a couple of hours every Sunday. And I spend that time not only preserving my staples, but also planning my meals for the week and batching and getting everything ready, taking things out of the fridge, making sure nothing gets lost. Because here's the deal. Have you ever wondered how restaurants can feed hundreds of people in just a half an hour, and why it takes us that same 30 minutes to feed ourselves and our family for just like a single meal? Restaurants, they don't have endless options. They have staples that are stocked, and then they're prepped and they're ready to go. They have 12 different types of chefs. They have some that clean the potatoes. They have some that chop the vegetables. They have some that make the soup. And then they have some that plate all of those dishes. And you're trying to do all of that every time you cook, and it's not very efficient. So, you're going to be all of those things, but if you do it in the right order, and if you do it at the right time, what happens is when it comes time to put food on the table for meals, all you have to do is plate it. You might have to heat something up and plate it. So I want you to think about, what are the 3 staples that would change your life, that would make the process of putting dinner on your table year-round easy? Because when you come home busy from a work day and you're too tired to stand in front of a stove to cook, too tired to cook, to cut things up, too tired to even decide what to eat, wouldn't it be great to grab something off a shelf, heat it up, and get it on the table in a couple minutes? And that's what's possible when you stock your staples. Now, what you want to do is think about, how much do you eat each week of each staple? And if you don't know, start a journal, because we're creatures of habit. What you're going to find is that generally you probably do like Italian once a week. You might do Indian once a week. You might do Thai once a week. You might, whatever the case may be, you might do soup once a week. You start to find these patterns, and you start to find the staples that are going to serve you all of those things. And then you can basically link this to your garden, deciding how many plants you're going to grow, or link it to the farmer's market. Go and pick up the ingredients that you need. All right. Now, when you're doing this, there's another layer to this. It's like, okay, now I want to stock these 3 staples, and I know how much I want. And so now I know how much I need to preserve. The next step is to figure out the rate at which you need to preserve it in order to get it to your table. And so for me, I don't necessarily like to do everything all at once. I like to do a couple hours every Sunday, just because it spreads it out. It makes it easier for me to think about rather than trying to do big batches. And so for like my dehydrated greens, what I know is that if I want a tablespoon of greens for every smoothie or something during the winter, then I know how many I need. And then I basically backtrack from there and I say, okay, this number of bunches creates this amount of tablespoons. Backtrack from there and I say, okay, how many bunches do I need to grow? And if my growing season is this long, how many bunches per week do I need to dehydrate? And so that's how I get to my goals. So remember, you want to think like a restaurant owner. You want to think in these big batches. You want to biggie size everything, because it's time consuming to pull everything out when you go to cook and wash and clean everything. And then when you're done, put everything back. So batching and automating, it's going to save you tons of time year round. All right. Just for a moment, think about creating 80 meals all at once. And I pick 80 meals randomly, but it's basically because it's about 3 meals a day for the month. Here's the deal. If you are in a hurry to get food to the table, you're going to be tempted to grab something convenient. And let's face it, like those convenient options often means less healthy, less fresh. All right. And I've been there. I'm tired. I hope the magic fairy, the dinner fairy, is going to show up and put dinner on the table. Guess what? You can be your own dinner fairy. Preserve the harvest for later so that you can get that fresh food on your table all the time. All right. And that's what I would love for you, is to have your kitchen stocked so meals take just a couple minutes to throw together. All right. So that's how you get there. You biggie size your meal plans, but you also keep it simple. That's why I said take 3 staples to start with. And then when you're getting started, cover those 3 staples. The next year, add a little bit more. And here's a pro tip for you guys. So if you're wondering what to do because you have multiple mouths to feed, you're like, Stacy, that's all well and good. A couple hours for you. You're single. You're feeding yourself. But what if you have lots of mouths to feed? Here's the deal. Hungry mouths, they come with hands. So, if you have people around that can help you, here's what I would tell you. If your kids are old enough, they can wash vegetables. They can snap the beans. I was snapping beans when I was probably 5 years old. I still remember, Stacy, snap the beans. Stacy, shuck the corn. Like I was the person helping in the kitchen. Your kids can do that too. When they're old enough to learn how to use a knife properly, they can chop things up. All right. And so one of the principles of my preservation system, I call it my Harvest into Meals preservation system, is many hands makes light work. So sometimes my housemates and I get together and we make tons of sauerkraut, and then we have sauerkraut ready for the next couple weeks. So you want to make a party, make it something that people enjoy. And the coolest part about getting your family involved, or your hungry mouths, whoever they are, your loved ones, your neighbors involved in the process, is that for people who are picky eaters, this gives them the opportunity to help create the recipes and the flavors that go into it. They're going to be more likely to eat that food. So I found with kids, this works wonders. If you can have them be a part of the process of the prep work, they are so much more likely to eat the food and to try new things and to put together flavors that they like. Their palate's not going to be the same as yours, and that's okay. All right. So that is one of the secrets to batching all this work, right? And one of my students said this, Kate says, we've got a counter full of colorful veggie ferments going regularly. I know what to do with all the beautiful variety of herbs we grow, and our food is tasting better, is fresher, definitely getting a boost nutritionally. And she says she's overcome harvest paralysis. If you're not sure what harvest paralysis is, it's basically when you have so much harvest and you don't know what to do with it all. So fermented foods is a great way to go if you have a lot of harvest and you need something to do with it. And guess what? Big batches work really, really well. All right. So secret number 2, in just 6 weeks, your pantry could be stocked with staples year round when you focus on your 3 staples first and then go from there. All right. All right. So secret number 3, Having a harvest preservation system not only helps you save time and energy preparing food for year round, but it also allows you to be creative, putting together unusual ingredients for delicious and unexpected meals in minutes. Now, I'm going to pop up here another slide, and I want to share a story with you about my parents. Let's see. So, all right. So my parents, I'm so blessed. They saw the value of fresh food. Growing up, this is something, the reason why I'm so passionate about sharing this with you is that I was brought up in a family of fresh food, and it changed my life. Health and well-being is just something that's wired into me. It's become so easy over the years to do all of this because it's something I value. It's something I'm committed to, and it's something I've been doing forever. So they were amazing at putting healthy meals on the table every day of my childhood, even when we were young, and even on a really tight budget. Now, I think at one point, our weekly budget for the four of us, I think it was $25 each week. And with inflation, I think that comes to like $100 a week for the four of us. And so it's not the tightest of budgets. Some people are on tighter budgets than that, but it's a pretty tight budget. And two things happen when you're on that kind of tight budget. So the first thing that happens is that you have to have a very clear system where you see exactly what the budget is, exactly what you're tracking, how money is spent, where the groceries are, how to track that. And because you want to ensure that you stay on that budget. And that's my mom. She loves organization. Well, I don't know if she loves it, but she's really good at it. Maybe she's not as passionate about it as I think she is, but she is really good at it. And she was good at making things really visible, visible, knowing what the meals were, where they were in the fridge, when we were going to eat them, and what we were going to do with all the leftovers. And here's the deal. When you make things visible, that's how you track things. That's how you know you're reaching your goal. So we've already talked about setting a goal with your 3 staples. Your next goal is to track that through the whole process. So in my house here, I have 11 housemates. And, this is something that I learned from my mom is you put something up on the fridge. It used to be for us just a piece of paper because there was no such thing as whiteboards when I was a kid. But here I use a whiteboard, and basically I have 11 housemates. I just post up there this week, and then I write down the things that are fresh that need to get eaten. So things that I basically took out of my bottom drawer that needed to get eaten and I needed to preserve. I made some quick pickles with radish and dill. I made some quick pickles with zucchini and cardamom. And then I made some fermented grape fennel jam. And I basically told everybody sometimes, here's the deal. So having the system be visible, that's really important to stay on track. That's how you stay out with your goal, right? The second part I learned from my dad, all right? And here's the deal. Sometimes you don't have all the ingredients you need for a recipe, and you have to figure out a creative substitution. So you have a system set up and you're like working your way through the system, and then you reach a point and you're like, oh crap, I don't have something that's a part of the system. What do I do now? And for my dad, he used to take recipes as a suggestion. So he used to make stuff up on the spot. And this was before the explosion of cable and cooking shows and internet recipes. He was basically, going by recipes on cards that, friends and family would pass around and cookbooks. And I remember once he was making a stir fry, and the recipe called for honey mustard mixture. And so honey and mustard, mix them together, and a couple other ingredients. And we were out of honey. And I saw my dad, he was like looking at the fridge, and he's thinking about it, and he grabs the grape jelly. And I was a kid, and I watched him grab the jelly and the mustard and start to put them together. And I was like, Dad, that's so gross. You're going to mess up the stir fry. You're going to mix mustard with grape jelly. And I was like, ew, gross, right? And he just smiled and laughed at me, and he said, it's going to be awesome. Don't worry, you're going to love it. Because he knew that honey, all it is it's sweet and it's a little thick in texture. And guess what? So is grape jelly. So as I ate that stir fry that night, in the first bite, I was a little bit worried about it, but it was really delicious. And he told me why he knew it was going to be so good, that it was the sweet and the texture, and that's how he substituted. And that's when the mysteries of meal planning really became clearer to me. I was like, oh, I get how this stuff works. Like there's all these recipes, but I get now how people can just put things together and how chefs can create things on the spot that are delicious. And I started to think of my dad kind of like a magician in the kitchen. So when I created my 7-step harvest into meals preservation system, I combined these two lessons from my parents, this idea of making systems that are visible, and the other thing, which is bringing creativity into the process. Because if you create a system and you eat the same thing all the time because you're systematized it, you're like, I had this goal and then I systematized it and I made sure that's what was on my plate over and over again, man, that gets boring. And I don't want you to spend the kind of effort that it takes to preserve all that food and then put it on your table and feel like, man, this is boring. We're eating the same thing all the time. So I want you to become a flavor ninja like my dad. And it really is easier than you think. So like I said, 2 pieces of the puzzle, right? Make things visible, and then basically this flavor idea. So I wanted to talk to you about my 7-step harvest into meals system here and introduce this to you. All right. Let's see. So the first step in this process is setting your goals. And we've already talked about this. So your first goal is really picking your top 3 staples and deciding, like, if that's your goal, those 3 staples, figuring out what a SMART goal looks like for those 3 staples. Now, when you're creating those goals, what you're going to do is you're going to make those goals what they call SMART. Specific, can you picture it? Can you just see it? Because if you can't see it, it's not specific enough. Is it measurable? Can you quantify it? Is it achievable? So is it a little bit challenging but realistic? So that's why I say 3 staples to start. Is it achievable? Oh, I mentioned that already. Sorry about that. Is it relevant? Does it work for you? Because who cares if it's somebody else's goal? Then, who wants to do somebody else's goal? Do the goal that works for you. And is it time bound? Can you take care of it in a certain amount of time? So similarly, like I was talking about how I would preserve everything in like 6 weeks time, put a time goal on it. And then the second step is to quantify your goals with a harvest log. So this is where you're starting to link your garden with what you are going to preserve. So not everybody is going to have a garden. I get that. And so you can, like I said earlier, you can preserve from the farmer's market if you like. But if you want to grow the things that you're going to be preserving, the first step you really want to do is to create a harvest log for yourself, especially if you're in the growing season now. Start measuring how many plants you're growing and how much you've harvested and when you've harvested it, because next year that's going to help you figure out your preservation plan and what you're going to preserve, when you're going to preserve it, how many plants. All right. So setting up this one tool and making it visible. So I have a piece of paper or I have a document on my computer and I basically write down every week how much I've harvested. All right. And so this has made a big difference in my students' lives, where basically they've been able to even out their harvest throughout the growing season by using this, because they're recognizing when and what they're harvesting. And then they start to garden a little bit differently the next year. And that allows them to even it out so that they're not trying to preserve everything all at once, because that is when things get a little frustrating and overwhelming, when there's all this stuff coming in from the garden all at once. All right. So the third step in the process is I've been hinting at it already, is once you have those quantified goals from your harvest log, the next step is to create your harvest plan for the next growing season. Because if you're already in your growing season, you already have your plants out there. So the first step is just notice what's being grown and how much you're harvesting. But the next part of that is to look into the future and plan for your preservation goals. So the things that make a good harvest plan for next year, and people call this a crop plan. So if you ever hear me use the words crop plan, this is what this is. Some people call it a planting schedule. but sometimes those terms mean different things to different people. So just keep that in mind. So a good harvest plan is going to show you how much harvest you can expect per plant, because you want to know how many plants to grow to reach your goals. You want to know how many plants you need to grow. And then again, you're going to track how much you're going to harvest and when, but in this case, you're going to predict when you're going to be harvesting, so that in the future steps, you can start to think about when you're going to preserve and how you're going to preserve. All right. Now, my students, they grow a lot of food. And one of the things that I help people do is with this crop plan, this harvest plan, is I help people really get on track to grow the amount of food that they want in order to reach their preservation goals. So imagine what it might mean for you to be growing so much food that you're basically right on track with your preservation goals and you have that fresh food available for the winter. Then the fourth step of the system is to divide your weekly harvest into your meal plan. And so this is when you start to get into the growing season and you're starting to bring in that food from the outdoors or bring it in from the farmer's market. And I talked about this briefly already, is what you want to do every week. You're going to take everything out of the fridge. This sounds like a drastic move, but it's going to save you so much on your grocery bill. And you're never going to lose any of that produce ever again. So you're going to take everything out of the fridge. And one of the things I do is I teach people, which part they're going to preserve, which part they're going to eat that week, batch and prepare for meals, get ready for your meals during the week, and which part you're going to just simply eat in that moment because you're there cooking stuff. All right. So this is the step about creating these, dividing everything up so that you know exactly where everything is going so that nothing gets left behind. All right. And then the fifth step of the process is actually doing the meal preparation for the week and also any preparation for your preserving. And so for me, this is where the flavor ninja comes out. All right. And when I do this process, this meal planning process, you want to make this really visible. All right. And so one of the things that I have is a template where I have basically all the different types of preservation techniques and what can come out of them. I have another set of all the different types of food I might eat. And by types of food, I mean salad, sandwich, stir fry, soup, burger, whatever, all those different things that I might eat. And then I have all my different flavor palettes. And when you cross those things, you basically, what happens is with this template, you put in whatever you have as your ingredients. You don't have to have the perfect recipe because this template provides you with opportunities and ideas that you wouldn't have previously thought. You input those things and it gets multiplied by, you have all these different options. And depending on whether you're in the mood for Italian or Indian or Jamaican or Thai or whatever the case may be, you can basically alter these dishes based on your taste buds for that day. So this takes your staples and it produces hundreds of options. So this is where it gets really exciting. So a good weekly meal plan, to make it visible, you want to batch all of your basic ingredients ahead of time. You might have your staples ready to go that are preserved and then everything batched in your fridge and ready to go. If you have to put together like plate things, you want to have everything batched and chopped and ready to go. And then you want to know all of your favorite flavor combinations and maybe some unusual ones that you want to try. And then basically you have your week mapped out and you just run with it. And you're going to find that the system is going to provide opportunities for you where you might come home and be like, you know what? I feel like I'm in the mood for X. Well, guess what? You can still use your staple. You just change your flavor palette up. And that's what you can do when you have a system that includes this creative element. All right. So the sixth step of the preservation process, or my harvest in a meal system, is to actually preserve according to your goals. So this is where you're actually doing all of the different techniques. So in my classes, I teach more in depth about all these different techniques: canning, dehydrating, freezing, quick pickling, fermenting, curing, and storing. I show you step by step how to do those things. So this is where you actually do those different techniques. All right, take care of them. So for me on a Sunday, I mentioned this, I'm basically pulling everything out of my fridge. And for a couple hours, I'm deciding what I'm going to preserve. And I do that. What am I going to batch for that week? And I do that. And then what, is there anything at the bottom of my fridge that I need to take care of? All right. And I didn't talk about curing and storing here on this live call. This live call is a little bit too short to cover everything, but it is one of the other preservation techniques. And this is something for those of you who are gardening that can put a whole bunch of food in your pantry for the winter. Things like squash, onions, garlic, sweet potatoes, carrots, and beets. These are things that you can really store long term for many months. All right. And I mentioned earlier all of these different techniques, and I just want to make sure, let me post that link one more time so it's at the top of the chat box. So I have this quick guide, which basically has all those 6 techniques and the pros and cons of each, because here's the deal. I mentioned this earlier. You're going to want to try 1 or 2 of these at a time. You're going to want to go, master one of them. If you try to do all of them at once, it's going to be overwhelming. In this quick guide, I show you the pros and cons of each one of those different preservation techniques so you know which one's going to be right for you. Because here's the deal. Some of you, some people, power might be an issue. You might be off grid, and so you might choose different techniques. For some of you, you may prefer that your food is alive, and so you're going to pick something like fermenting because you don't want to heat up your food or you don't want to dehydrate it. So you might have a different reason for picking the technique that you pick, and some of the pros and the cons are listed in this guidebook for you. All right, so the 7th and final step of that harvest in a meal system is to create a preservation log. So at the start, we had our goals for the preservation, whatever our staples were that we're going to preserve. We have some goals and we write them down, we quantify them. Our preservation log is the place where we start to take those goals and make them visible. So a good preservation log will tell you what you preserved and when you preserved it. It will also tell you how much you have on hand and what you already ate, so that if you need more, then you can see your quantities are dwindling, and you can either make more or you can stretch it. Like, let's say it's the middle of the winter and you're eating your pasta sauce faster than you realized. Maybe you cut back and you say, okay, I want this to last a little bit longer, so I'm not going to eat as many jars per week. Or if you're, fermenting, it's easy because you can always ferment more. So if you notice yourself, not having as much as you want, then you can always make more. So it's important to know how much you have on hand, what you already ate. It's also important to know when you preserved it and when it's going to go bad. So here's just one version of a different type of template that I use with my preservation techniques, where I talk about, when I need to eat it by, what exactly it is that I created. And then I create little check boxes to show how many I have on hand and how many that I've already eaten. It's a good way. You want to make this as visible as possible so that you can track your goals over time, and you can loop back to the beginning step, which is setting goals. So as you figure out how well you have mastered your preservation goals by looking at your preservation log, now you loop back to step 1 and you set more goals for the next year. All right. So that is the 7-step harvest in a preservation system. And the idea is that we have a system that helps us with spend our time effectively and really put a lot of our food into our kitchen, into our pantry, stock it very effectively, so that we can then put creative meals on our plate as well. So systemic approach, but also allows us the flexibility so that we don't feel like, oh man, I don't feel like eating that thing again today. So that's the 7-step harvest into meals system that gets you started. All right. So here's the deal. I'm looking at the chat box. All right, so here's the deal. Post your questions. We're going to get started here in a minute on questions. Go ahead and enter those questions in the box on the right-hand side of the screen. And well, I'm assuming the chat box is on the right for you. It's on the right for me. I'm sure you got plenty of questions. I have seen a couple of the questions already pop up, and I'm going to get to those in just a minute. But first, I want to ask you a question. So if you followed what I showed you in secret number 1 and you simply preserved everything left at the bottom of your fridge each week. So you saved 40% on your groceries each year. Remember, no little pepper left behind. And you followed what I showed you in secret number 2. So you batched your staples in just a couple weeks from the freshest produce of the year so that you had a fresh supply year round. It was nutrient rich, tasted better than store-bought, and it tasted like summer even when it's cold outside. And you also applied secret number 3 to get those stapled foods into your pantry, to have a system to ensure that you were achieving your goals and you were putting creative meals on your table in just minutes. Wouldn't that be exciting? You know, if you put these ideas to work for you, what might be possible in your life? Now, how many of you are a little overwhelmed because this is a lot of information at once? And I get it. This is a long journey that we've taken today. So it's not possible for me to cover everything in a 60-minute live class. So I have created a special offer for those of you who are ready to move forward and implement what we've been talking about. So inside my 5-week Preserve the Harvest course, I walk you through all of these preservation techniques that we've talked about in detail. And we go step by step. You watch over my shoulder, and we do curing, storing, dehydrating, drying, freezing, fermenting, quick pickling, and canning. And the first week, you're going to learn how to pick food for maximum flavor and freshness. All right. You're also going to learn how to cure and store those vegetables like butternut, squash, garlic, onion, and carrots. And safety is so important in preserving the harvest. So we're going to talk about food handling, so you know that you're doing it right, and you're going to get a sense of what things look like if they're going wrong, so that your family is safe. And then in week 2, freezing and drying, you're going to see the fast ways to save food for later. These are the fastest ways typically. And I show you how to make some of my favorite healthy snack foods. Because let's face it, the snack foods at the grocery store, they're not healthy. They have crap in them. Have you seen all the crazy crap in those ingredients? So I'm going to show you kale chips. I'm going to show you eggplant bacon, which is one of my favorites. So you don't have to rely on the grocery store when you get a hankering for something that's crispy. All right. And you can dry all of your tea for cold and flu season. And then in week 3, we'll learn to boost your gut health with all that amazing fermented, funky, fun stuff, and keep those chronic diseases at bay. We've got fermented jams, we've got kimchi, and more. And of course, we're going to show you how to can safely in week number 4. And creative ways to make substitutions that are safe so that you don't have to eat the same thing every time. All right. And then in week 5, basically the entire system, I walk you through how to make all of this visible so that you reach your goals and that you do it effectively, and that you get that food onto your plate, that it's delicious, and that it's new flavorful ways to get that food on your plate so you're not eating the same thing all the time. All right. And the system really helps to simplify this whole process because you're focused on your goals in this whole thing, right? So for beginners, I can help you preserve those first 3 staples to get them into storage, find creative ways to use your weekly, or to put them to use in your weekly meals. And for people with a bit of experience, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, I can help you create a system where all the pieces work together to serve your preservation goals, because I've got a systematic approach that works, and it provides creative answers to persistent problems. And for those of you with lots of mouths to feed, keep in mind I've created quite a few events and run pop-up restaurants in Brooklyn. So if you're having trouble thinking big and getting lots done in your kitchen effectively, you're going to see tricks that I use to getting all that cooking done quickly. And I want you to get all this done as effectively as possible. So I have this ebook, my 101 delicious recipes, that you can just get started right away. It includes flavorful recipes like those zucchini quick pickles that I shared earlier. Now, I'm going to post this up in the box. I forgot to post the offer. So let me share the link to the class with you. So here is the link to sign up for class, and the course is available now for $197. And just to put that in perspective, what would it be worth for you to spend just a couple of weeks together and have fresh food stocked in your kitchen year round? This is healthy food. It tastes better than what you can find at the grocery store. It's fresh from your garden, or you can also preserve from the farmer's market. And because it's stocked right in your kitchen, it's convenient. And you can whip up meals in minutes, even after a long long day at work. So that's really what I would want for you year after year. And it's my passion to help you achieve that. And I've helped people who've never done any of this, help them get started. I've walked them through step by step until they had the confidence to do it on their own. And guess what? When all this food stuff is taken care of and you have fresh, healthy food on your table all the time with less effort than you think, imagine what else you can do with your life, what that will open up in your life, what you can do with that time that you're going to free up. So here's why I want you to register today for class. There are a couple of super cool bonuses when you register now. So the first bonus is, I'm a little bit behind in my slides. So the first bonus is that there are live Q&A sessions with me. This is your food preservation hotline. I answer all your questions to help take you a step forward in your goals. And all these calls are recorded because I have students all over the world. There's people on this call from South Africa and Brazil. And I saw, was it Norway? Where did I see? Several continents, South America. So I have students all over the world, and I would love for you to get your questions answered. So the calls are recorded. You can listen whenever it's convenient. You can pre-submit your questions, so you always have an opportunity to get your questions answered. Now, the second bonus that's available now is access to it's a crop planning course. Now, again, this is like your harvest planning. This is the way that you link. If you're gardening, this is the way that you link what you're doing in the garden with what you're growing to preserve. And so if you are new to gardening, this is going to help give you a sense in the future of what you need to plant when in order to reach your preservation goals. So this is a great way for you to finally link the things that are coming out of your garden with the things that you want to preserve and tackle those goals systematically. All right. So I'll show you exactly how to do that. Now, the third bonus when you grab this deal now is, this is a bonus that I have never offered before. It's how to make cheese and sour cream and yogurt, and it's all plant-based. So this is all about fermenting seeds, nuts, and tofu to create lots of creamy delights for your dinner plate. And you're going to love this. So imagine putting a little bit of, this is a pesto, that little ball on top is a pesto almond cheese. Putting it on top of your foods, because here's the deal. When you mix herbs and spices together with your homemade cheeses, you can make so many incredible flavors. And this is where you get to experiment more with being your own flavor ninja. You can add so much to your plate with these cheeses. Now, my housemates and I, we got together one night for a little cheese making party, and I taught them how to make yogurt from cashews. I taught them how to make soft cheeses from walnuts, sunflower seeds, almonds, macadamia nuts. You can use whatever your favorite nuts and seeds are. We also made a harder rind cheese from tofu. So you can do that as well. And in just a couple of hours of our time, with a couple of us doing the work, we had 5 big batches. You can't see my hands very well, but 5 big batches that lasted us a couple weeks. And all of them were uniquely flavored to exactly what we wanted to try. We did like a cacao cinnamon cheese that was amazing. We did something that was like a soft pepper jack cheese. And we did a delicious cashew yogurt. So, this is all about you getting creative so that you have some more fermented things on your plate that are delicious. All right. So there you go. So everything in the class, the Preserve the Harvest class, is going to help set you up for success in the Harvest into Meals system. And then you've also got these 3 bonuses: the live Q&A with me, the crop planning course in order to link your harvest to your preservation goals, and how to make cheeses, yogurts, and sour creams. And time is of the essence here because these bonuses all disappear very soon. So you're going to want to get started right away. The class materials are ready for you to go when you sign up. So register now, take advantage of these bonuses, and there's a button on your screen that says register now. That's where you want to click in order to go over to our secure form and get started. And you might be thinking, I can figure out all this on my own because Google is awesome, right? And take a moment to think to yourself, that's always an option to figure all this out on your own. Just think how much time you're going to spend to do that. And wouldn't it be nice, don't you suppose, you might find some faster success if you had a guide, somebody who's already been there and done that. And I have been there and I have done that, done lots of experimentation. And I would love for you to join the class, to take advantage of the Harvest into Meals system so that you can you can shortcut all the 10 years of experience that this has taken me to get where I am now. All right. And here's what I want you to know about me. I'm nobody special. I am just like you. I sometimes suck at putting food on the table when I'm hungry and I'm tired and it's been a long day at work. I have a busy schedule like you do. And so sometimes I really struggle remembering to cook. That sounds crazy, but it's true. So that's why I love my Harvest into Meals system, because it's a routine and I know what I need to do each week and each day to keep bringing that fresh food to my table. So that's something that's available to you here. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, everything I do has a guarantee. This is all risk-free. All the course materials are available for you now. The cheese bonus is coming soon. It's not yet available, but it will be very soon. Everything else is all available for you now. And you could watch all the materials, get started. You could join us for both live Q&As, and you're still within that 30-day money-back guarantee. So if the class is not what you're looking for, it's 100% risk-free. You can simply send us an email and let us know, and we'll refund your money. All right, so that's the deal on the table here, and I would love to see you in class. Go ahead and click the Register Now button to get started. And one thing that I just want you to think about, habits. They are really hard to break sometimes, right? And I have figured this out, how to integrate this into my life, because cooking is something I forget to do. And so I've had to integrate new routines. But this isn't about me, it's about you. So if you leave now, you have learned quite a bit today, which is awesome. And I hope you go out there and you take your golden nuggets and you just get on out there and start preserving the harvest. But I'm guessing for a lot of you that tomorrow morning, you're just going to slip into your old routine. You won't necessarily do these things. You won't necessarily write down your preservation goals and take that action. But when you register for class, I'm not going to let you go back to your old habits. I'm going to make sure that you're successful breaking those habits, breaking them down, rebuilding new habits. So if you want real lasting change, you need repeated exposure and you need proven techniques that work. And that's what you get when you invest today in this class. So click the Register Now button, and I look forward to seeing you in your kitchen, stocking your kitchen with all this fresh food. All right. So let's get into your questions. I know you've been patiently waiting. All right. So here's what I would love for you to do. I see some questions posted in the question box already, and I'm going to get started with those first, and I will move on from there. So if you have not posted your question, go ahead and post it in the chat box. If you posted it a lot earlier, I see Crystal's been tagging some of those questions for me, so that's good. I can see those listed. But if I don't get to your question, you can always pop it at the top. So this question is from Dawn. And Dawn says, can tomatoes be frozen in ball jars? I think I read about that, but it seems that the glass would break when contents expand. So here's the deal, Dawn. Physics, what you're talking about is basically the idea of physics, heating and cooling. You can put glass jars in the freezer and they can work for you. And like you said, if you're putting, let's say, think about your freezer trays for a minute. They're plastic, right? One of the reasons they're plastic is that freezing and contracting. But the other reason is that we twist those plastic trays and then basically the ice cubes pop out. So in the ball jars, if you leave some space for whatever the contents of that jar to expand upward, you don't want to fill the glass all the way, and it has a little bit of space to expand upwards, that's what it's going to do. It's not going to try to expand outwards towards the glass because the glass is going to be hard. So what you want to do is basically You might want to, if you're worried about this, you can always put your tomatoes in the jars, put them in the fridge to cool them down, and then move them over to the freezer so that the freezing down process is not all in one step. But what I found in the past is that I have stuck ball jars in the freezer. As long as there's enough space at the top for things to expand, I haven't had anything break. I'd be curious to hear if anybody else has any experience where they may have seen something break. What you don't want to do under any circumstances, all right, this is important, super important. What you don't want to do is go from boiling to freezing with glass, because that will break a jar like that. It'll be instantaneous. And so one of the things, this is a safety tip for all of you who are canning, when you're standing over a hot stove and there is boiling water and there's glass jars in that boiling water, sometimes the water can evaporate and you need to add more water in order for that canning process to happen. My housemate did something the other day that scared the crap out of me. He didn't realize that he had to pour hot water, boiling water, into the boiling water because there's glass in there. And he just pulled cold water out of the kitchen tap and he poured cold water into this vat of boiling water that had glass in it. And guess what happened? Those jars exploded instantly. So you never want to go from cold to boiling. So if you have, let's say you are going to put your tomatoes in ball jars to save them for later, because maybe you're avoiding plastic bags, which is cool. So you're using ball jars instead. Make sure the tomatoes are cool when they go in the jar. Make sure there's space for that to expand, and then put it in the freezer. Because if those tomatoes were at all hot and then you went straight into the freezer, kabam, dangerous, very dangerous. All right. So that's really important. Thanks for bringing that one up. Okay. Let's see. We have a question from Mark. So Mark wanted to know, is any part of this available in Harvest Club? So Harvest Club is specifically about growing vegetables and herbs, and we don't really talk about preserving the harvest because a lot of the people in Harvest Club, they're not really interested in preserving the harvest. And so to have a space where some people want both, but some people only want one. So the Harvest Club is really just purely about harvesting. So some of the ideas around planning your garden are in Harvest Club, but we don't talk about any of these preservation techniques or this preservation log or how to preserve. There might be members who share that material inside of Harvest Club. That's not something that I share inside of Harvest Club because I'm just sensitive that some people are just there to learn how to get the most out of their garden. They're not necessarily thinking about preserving the harvest. So that's why they're separate things. All right. So Cornelia has a question that comes up a lot. So Cornelia, awesome question. So Cornelia says, is it safe to just eliminate sugar in canning recipes? So here's the deal, Cornelia. I'm not going to say that it's safe to eliminate it from all recipes because I would have to look at all the different recipes in order to do that. But what I will do is talk about sugar in general. So one of the things that with canning that you want is a certain pH. And the thing that gets you that pH is not necessarily sugar. It's potentially things like lemon or vinegar, something that's going to be acidic, that's going to shift you into the zone where, so canning is safe at acidic pHs. So the sugar that happens in canning is not necessarily the thing that shifts the pH. So there are recipes where you can remove the sugar and you're totally fine, as long, and in the cases that your acidity is correct. So like, for instance, when I can, a lot of people ask this about fruit jams. They ask this about just fruit in general, like whole fruit. So one of the things that I do with my jams and my fruit is instead of adding cane sugar, I simply add fruit juices. So these are things that I a lot of times have to buy at the supermarket in order to, if I don't have fruit juice available. Like I have orange trees, so actually I could go orange and lemon trees, so I could make my own orange and lemon juice. But let's say I'm canning strawberries and I want to use like somebody on another live class used pomegranate juice. So what I would do is I would make sure that it's 100% fruit juice, just that juice. And sometimes those fruit juices have apple juice in them. They're a combination. It's okay. So you can replace your sugar water, which is what a lot of people use to can fruits, with fruit juices. So you still have natural sugars present, but it's not the cane sugar that most people use. So those are the substitutions I use. And you want to make sure that you're following recommended guidelines. So you want to make sure that you find the right recipe in order to do that. So a lot of recipes, you can reduce the amount of sugar by quite a lot. And a lot of times the sugar is more about the flavor than about having the right pH in order for your recipe to be safe. But I can't say it for every recipe because I'm nervous that there's a recipe out there that I might stick my foot in my mouth, and I would never want you to do something unsafe. So I can't say for every recipe out there. Linda says, I'm psyched to get started on sauerkraut. Awesome. Yeah, sauerkraut's the best, man. Jory had the question about reducing sugar and preserves. So same thing, Jory. It's finding ways to use fruit juices, which are natural sugars. You're going to find, so I did a taste test. You guys might find this interesting. So I did a series I did nectarines that were from a tree down the street, basically. And I grabbed mint from my garden, and then I took fruit juice, and then I took different levels of sugar. And I tried all the different amounts of sugar, and I tried the fruit juice, and I tried a mixture of fruit juice and sugar. I tried all the different variations. And what I found was that I even did one without the fruit juice, I think. And that one I tested to make sure the pH was okay in order to can it. And my preference, this is going to be a little crazy for some people, my preference was the one with absolutely no fruit juice. It was like plain mint water. I basically made tea, hot tea, poured it over the peach or the nectarines, and then I basically ate that. And I made sure I added enough lemon juice in order to get the right acidity so that the canning was safe. Now, my housemates, they thought the one that was made with the mint tea, they're like, it's not sweet enough. And for them, they liked the fruit juice version. And for all of them, the ones with the sugar was way too sweet. So you can really, this is something that's exciting for people when you start to learn how to can without all that sugar. So Jackie says, Ari, lemons and canning. Don't lemons make things alkaline? No, they don't. They make things acidic. So it's very interesting how in your body, it's different than in the canning process. And this is something that trips people up a lot. Different things go on in your body than go on in a jar. So when a lot of times with our bodies, when we're talking about our nutrients and our health, there's a lot of research that goes into the types of foods that help us stay alkaline. And, those things are things like celery and asparagus and lemon and some of these other things, right? And so staying more alkaline. But when the actual pH of lemon juice is acidic. So in your body, it does something else. But in the jar that you're canning, you want the jar to be acidic. And so that's why you're adding things that are acidic, like lemon juice, like vinegar. And by the way, here's something that I think is important to understand, because I remember when I was canning my first pasta sauce, remember that pasta showdown that I told you guys about? One of the things that I think holds people back from preserving and canning, and they look at the recipes and they're like, oh, that doesn't look good at all. Or like, oh, I don't want to add that salt, or, oh, I don't want to add that vinegar. Or, oh, I don't want to add that lemon or whatever. So when I made my pasta sauce, I was modifying pasta sauce recipes, and I had to make sure that the pH was right in order for that recipe to be canned. And in order to do that, I had to add quite a bit of lemon juice. And I was like, oh man, this is going to change the flavor. My pasta sauce that I'm trying to enter my pasta sauce showdown. It's going to be so good, but all this lemon juice is going to mess it up. What I found is that when we actually ate that sauce, there was no that residual lemon juice, that flavor, it disappeared. So if you're looking at recipes and you're like, I don't know about that, you want to try it. You want to do it right. And later, once you understand what the recipe tastes like, you might decide after you bring it out from the pantry and you open it up and you taste it, you can always shift that flavor to a new space. Because guess what? If you have too much of one thing, you add a little bit of something else and the flavor is going to shift. So you don't have to eat it straight out of the pantry the way that it tastes in the jar. You can change it. But in my experience, that lemon juice that you add, or whatever the case may be, it's not something that when you think, you're like, wow, this seems like a lot of lemon juice to put inside of this jar, and you think it's going to taste a lot like lemon, but it doesn't. So that's something that when I first got started kind of held me back trying different recipes. Was I didn't think I was going to like them, but I actually did. So something for people to understand. Valentine asks, what's my favorite preservation method? My favorite preservation method by far is fermentation. Here's why. So you can ferment pretty much anything. And fermented foods are still alive. They're not cooked. So you're getting the maximum amount of nutrients from that plant. And then the other thing I love about fermented foods is that this is something that you can make, and you don't need refrigerator shelf for it. You don't need... I put it on my desk. I literally have ferments that are like lined up on my work desk, so that as I'm working, I see them, so that I know if any, like the thing with fermented products is that if something goes wrong, they mold. And so I can watch and I can see the fermentation process happening, and I know when they're going to taste good. I know if they've gone bad, I can take care of them. So I love that you can just do it anywhere. You don't need the refrigerator. You don't need the freezer. You don't need equipment to do it. You can do fermentation simply with vegetables and salt, and that's it. So that's one of the reasons why I love the fermentation process. And and it's great to travel with, like to take with you, because you don't need to put it in the fridge. I'll go on a business trip and I can take fermented food with me, and I can take my gut health with me, which is pretty cool. I can also take it as a gift. It's a really easy gift because it's beautiful. It comes in these jars that are beautiful. So it's my favorite. I just love fermented food. I just, now that I don't eat sugar, a lot of times the fermented foods is my flavor palette anyway. Bernadine says, can beets be fermented? Yes, they can. So my housemate, she made, recently we had a big sauerkraut party, and she did this really cool one. It was like cabbage, beets, carrots, and then a whole bunch of different herbs and spices. And man, it was good. It was really earthy. Now, a couple of things, for some of you who are fermenting, or in general, for some of you who are thinking about these foods that are raw, things like beets, things like kale, for some of us, when we eat a lot of that raw, it's not our digestion. It's a little bit tough on our digestion. So some of us, it doesn't bother us at all. But for my sister, she can't eat beets, so she can't eat fermented beets. But you'll know for yourself, if that's a food that you can eat, then you can probably eat it raw. So yeah, beets can be fermented. You can ferment. Beets are so cool because you can ferment the greens and you can ferment the beets. So you got like a 2-in-1. It's amazing. All right. So Rebecca was asking, Rebecca, very awesome question. I'm glad you asked this. So every one of these techniques is different. And Rebecca was asking, can you use lemon juice instead of vinegar in fermenting? Fermenting does not use lemon juice or vinegar. Fermenting uses salt. All right. What happens in fermenting is that the there is bacteria present on your food. No matter what, bacteria is present, and it's good bacteria. And the lactobacilli bacteria family, which is what is present in fermented foods, is what you are producing a habitat for. And so things that are lemon or vinegar, those acidic things, are going to kill the exact bacteria that you're trying to ferment and you're trying to create. So you don't want to use lemon juice or vinegar when you're fermenting. Not at all. Never. You want to use salt. All right. And you don't want to use iodized salt. You want to use a beautiful, like, crystallized salt. All right. All right. So Bernadine was asking, can beet leaves be chips too? Of course. So one of those images that I showed you was of Swiss chard that I had put out on the dehydrator, and beet leaves are the same. So yeah, they can go there as well. Now, somebody else asked about, what do you do? Joanne asked, what would you do with chard that has powdery mildew or aphids on it? So I'm not sure if you're asking how would I preserve it or what would I do about it in the garden. But powdery mildew is something that I wouldn't necessarily take and preserve. But powdery mildew, if you actually take those leaves and look at them, powdery mildew is actually on the surface. It's a fungus that grows on the surface of the plant. You can actually soak chard that has powdery mildew on it, and you might be able to still eat it. I don't know that I would preserve it for later, but I would cook it up if I could rub that powdery mildew off. And aphids, again, just rinse them off. So for in general, I would say if your plants have diseases and pests on them, you want to remove that stuff before you preserve for sure. Those are things that can go bad in the process later. So you want to take, if you're canning, you want to take the freshest, most amazing produce, and that's what you're going to can and put in a pantry for later. If you're going to, let's say, dehydrate, sometimes I'm a little bit looser. When I grow my herbs and then I go to dehydrate my herbs, I don't necessarily wash them all the time. Everybody's going to be different on this one. So you want to do what feels right for you, but I'm not worried about eating a couple bugs. So if, let's say I had a couple bugs on my herb plants, what I do typically is I take my herbs and I harvest them carefully so that there's no soil on them. And then I just simply dehydrate them from there. And I just don't worry about any of the stuff that might be on them from being outside, because I just figure it's probably all healthy stuff. But for some people, that seems gross to them, or they're worried about it. So what they'll do is they will rinse the herbs with water, they'll dry them, and then they will dehydrate them. So for you, those bugs, if they get dehydrated and you eat them, for me, I don't worry too much about it, but for other people, they do worry about it. So that's up to you. But I wouldn't, if you have any kind of disease or fungal disease or bacterial disease on your plants, those are not things that you want to save for later, because that can be really unsafe. All right. So if you're quick pickling, that will kill off any pests or diseases that are present. And the diseases, the fungal diseases and the bacterial diseases that are in your garden, those are not necessarily things that can actually hurt you. So you don't have to worry about eating that food, but it's not the best food to preserve for later. You want the best food if you're going to be saving it for later. All right. Okay, Catherine has a question about the course. She says, how long do we have to use the course? I'm concerned about my lack of time right now. Great question. So the course materials are available for you for your life. So once you register for the course, it will always be available for you on our website, in our portal. If we ever move it, we'll tell you exactly where it's moved to. All the bonuses that are available now will be available to you when you are ready for it. And so one of the things that I do with my classes is, I know that there is, as part of the course, I didn't mention it here, but there is also a Preserve the Harvest Facebook group, so that if you have questions about preserving the harvest, you can get them answered there. So if you miss the Q&A sessions, you can get questions answered there. If you have lots of questions, submit them all, even if you can't be there for the call, because I'll answer those questions. And then when you do have time to come back, the questions will be waiting for you on our page. And keep in mind, what I do is for all these Q&A calls, I actually have them on the course page. When you register for the class and you log in, you're going to see past calls and you're going to see the past questions that were asked. So you're going to learn quite a bit from all of the commonly asked questions there as well. All right. So everything that is in the course is going to be on our webpage for you, for your life. You have access to all those materials. And every once in a while, I add a bonus and it kind of shows up as a surprise in there. So just so you know, everything that you see there will always be there for you. And more surprises might show up along the way. Okay. And Sarah says, yeah, so Sarah was talking about the dehydrator. So with dehydrators, a lot of times we're doing, a certain number of degrees for a certain number of minutes. And so those bugs, it's going to kill them and it's going to dehydrate them. So in this case, Sarah was saying 130 degrees for 30 minutes is supposed to kill any insect. So a lot of times our dehydration times are longer than 30 minutes. So any insects that are in there are going to die off. Lita is asking a very typical question. What type of dehydrator do you use? So one of the things that I do in the course is that I walk through all of the different equipment for all of these different styles of preserving the harvest so that you know exactly what you need to get. And I will say here that with dehydrators, the reason why I picked the dehydrator that I picked is a couple things, which I'll tell you about here. So I like my Excalibur 9 tray. And here's why I like that dehydrator. Number one, if I'm going to dehydrate and turn the power on, I want to dehydrate a bunch of stuff at once. So I have got 9 trays. Second reason I like it is that it's square. And some of those dehydrators that are circular, it's hard to fit things around in that circle because it's circular. And so when you have a square, you can fill the thing all the way to the edges much more easily. And if I'm gonna make a fruit roll-up, I teach you how to make fruit roll-ups in this class. If I'm gonna make a fruit roll-up, I want the fruit to go all the way to the very edges so that I have the biggest square possible of fruit roll-up. If I'm gonna make I make my own dehydrated protein bars out of lentils and coconut and almonds. If I'm going to make my own protein bars, I'm going to go all the way to the edges of that dehydrator. All right. So 9 trays square. And the other reason why I like my Excalibur, it's tried and true. Everybody loves this dehydrator. And I found one used for, I think it was $100. So if you go on Craigslist or somewhere local, you might be able to pick up a used Excalibur 9 tray for not very much money. Lita says, mine seems to take forever to dry things. So sometimes it depends on the recipe. Like some things take longer than others. What I've noticed is, when you're making, when I make my eggplant bacon, because I'm marinating things and soaking things and then dehydrating them, those are things that sometimes take overnight. Like I'll go to bed and I'll wake up and 8 hours later, my eggplant bacon will be done. But other things only take like 30 minutes. So it just depends on what you're dehydrating. And so that's one of the reasons why I like the Excalibur is if I'm going to turn it on for a couple hours at a time, then basically I want to know that the whole thing is full. Okay, Rebecca was saying, is it quick pickling that uses vinegar? Can you substitute lemon juice? Great question, Rebecca. So quick pickling typically does use vinegar. And here's the deal. What's basically helping to preserve your food for later is that acidity. So I don't have a ratio for you right here, but you can do some substitutions with that quick pickling. You may find flavors that work well for you. And here's something that I didn't talk about during the quick pickling talk is that you're really just preserving it for a couple weeks. It's not going to last you forever. So when you're quick pickling, this is just a way to say, you know what, this is in the bottom of my fridge. I want to use it, but I'm not ready right this moment. So I'm going to quick pickle it and I'm going to keep it on hand for at least 2 weeks. And you might find that with quick pickling, sometimes it lasts longer, like up to 4 weeks. And some people have even done up to 6 weeks. So trust your nose, trust your taste buds. If it seems off, don't eat it. With quick pickling, oftentimes what happens is that it just starts to taste too pickled or taste too sour. And that's how you know you don't want it anymore. So you can decide what's good for you. So I would say play around with that lemon juice. If vinegar is something that you're not so excited about, you could play around with the lemon idea, and just know that your taste buds and your nose are what you want to trust. So you might find when I quick pickle, I don't use a lot of sugar because the apple cider vinegar that I use has a little bit of sweetness to it with that apple. So if you're using just lemon to quick pickle, you might find that you want to add something sweet to it. So that's something that I would recommend, coming to class for, and talking about recipes. And this is where we get to experiment and share ideas with each other, because this is not something that I can easily answer for you. This is more like let's experiment and discover what tastes good to you and what's going to work for you. Let's see. All right. Let's see. Okay, so Lynn has a question here that I missed and Jackie. Okay, cool. Let's talk about these two. So Lynn's question is, when you dry your greens, are they just as nutritious and tasty in your smoothies as fresh? I've been freezing kale and chard, which works well, but it takes a lot of the freezer space. So what I've found with the dried greens is that in general, they're just pretty bitter, because you're basically dehydrating them. If you're dehydrating them plain, they can be pretty bitter, and they can really hold on to the flavor of those greens. So I find that they do hold their flavor pretty well. And freezing all that kale and that chard for smoothies, it would take a lot of freezer space. So dehydrating could really cut down your space quite a bit. The nutrition, let's cover the nutrition for a minute. So here's the deal. When you're dehydrating, the magic in the dehydration process is that the dehydrating temperatures that you're using are lower than cooking. So there's a reason why you use a dehydrator versus an oven. In a dehydrator, your temperatures are lower, and therefore the plants are not cooking, which means that the enzymatic reactions, I talked about it earlier, when you're freezing, oftentimes you don't want to just chop and freeze your vegetables, because that enzymatic reaction can start to happen and the plant can start to break down, and you lose those nutrients, you lose flavor, you lose texture. But when you're dehydrating, that doesn't happen. You're basically, it's like, how do I say this? So the nutrition stays in place because that enzymatic reaction doesn't happen. It kind of stops it in place. And your temperatures, when you go above a certain temperature, you start to cook those greens, and that's when you start to lose nutrients. So that's why a dehydrator is a lower temperature than your oven. Older ovens, if you have an older oven, you might find an oven with temperatures below 145 degrees Fahrenheit. But for a lot of people, their ovens start at like 250. It's too high to dehydrate. And also in your dehydrator, you have a fan that basically blows the air across the food. And what that does is that it keeps the food at a raw temperature. So below a certain temperature, the food is still considered raw, and raw foods still contain all of those nutrients without getting cooked. So one of the reasons why people dehydrate is exactly this, that you maintain your nutrients and all of that benefit that all those vitamins have for you. All right. Now, question from Jackie. Do fermented foods need refrigeration once opened? I see a lot of fermented foods in the refrigeration sections of stores. Is that because of packaging? So here's the deal. This is really important, Jackie. I'm so glad you brought this up. So when you go to the grocery store, and you see, let's say sauerkraut, and it's on the shelf, like in the area where it's not in the refrigerated section. That is not the sauerkraut I'm talking about. That's not fermented. So it is sauerkraut, but it has been canned, and therefore it's not alive anymore. It's been heated up. That's how it can be on a shelf. The stuff that's in the refrigerator section is still alive. So if you're wanting fermented foods that are alive and you're buying them from the grocery store, you have to buy them from the section that is refrigerated. And the reason that they're in the refrigerated section is that the people who make those fermented foods can't guarantee the way that that food is going to be stored, shipped, all of that stuff, and the packaging that goes along with it, the jiggling, the jostling, the everything. And so they need to put it in the refrigerated section in order to keep those fermented cultures alive. So basically what happens with fermented foods is, yes, you can put them on your countertop and keep them on your countertop as long as you like, as long as they're not molding. And I show you ways to do that in the class. But there is a time at which you can put it in the fridge to have it last longer. So let's say you're going on vacation and you can't watch your ferments that are on your counter. You can simply put them in your fridge, and that they'll be like kind of suspended in time. They'll ferment, but they'll ferment more slowly, and then they'll be safe. So the stuff that's at the grocery store, in order to keep that food safe and fermented, they need to keep it in the refrigerated section. It would be too challenging. They would have too many food scares and too many food safety concerns if they tried to put that fermented food out on the shelf. But at home, the cool thing is about doing this at home is that all of the food safety stuff, all the scares that we're worried about at the grocery store, it's actually easier at home, I find, to make sure that you have safe food on your table. The greens that you're growing in your garden, if you're using the right garden practices, there's little or no concern about things like E. coli and salmonella and all that stuff. When you start to preserve and can things, you start to get worried about botulism, which is a real scare, and you want to make sure you follow every safety precaution. But every other tactic, like freezing, quick pickling, fermenting, what did I skip? All of those things are dehydrating. All of those things, there's very little, there's a lot less food scare involved than, say, the canning process. Dehydrating is something that you want to make sure you have a good storage space for that so that it stays dehydrated, because it can get moldy. But the cool thing is about that, all these processes, with the exception of canning, all the other processes, they show you, like the what you've produced, it really shows you when it's gone bad. And I can help you identify in class, like, is this okay? Is this not okay? This is normal. This is not normal. Because there are some things when you're first getting started that look really funny that are totally fine. And it's hard to know the difference sometimes when you're just getting started. I remember the first time that I made my first fermentation and I was putting that bite in my mouth, and I was so nervous because it smelled good. It smelled right. But how did I know, 100% sure, know that this was going to be safe? And I remember putting it in my mouth and just being like, oh gosh, what am I doing? And now, over time, I'm just so much more confident because I've seen what everything looks like. I know what's normal. I know what's not normal. I know what to look out for. I know tricks to keep things looking good and tasting good. So it's something that you gain with experience. And when you work with somebody experienced, you can send photos and be like, hey, this is what's going on. What is this? And it's really helpful to have somebody who's been there and done that. So that's one of the reasons why I would love for you all to register for this class. All right. So we're coming up to the top of the hour and I'm starting to lose my voice. Cool. And people are sharing tips about dehydration and humidity and all these different all of these different concepts, which is great. So thank you guys for being so active in the chat box and helping each other out. That's been really cool to watch. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see. I think we're going to wrap up here because I'm feeling myself lose my voice. So I would love for you all to join this class, to get started. So if you are still on the fence about this class, keep in mind, there is this 30-day no risk period where basically you get to know if the course is for you. Take the course, start to move through the materials, get started, start preserving, making some goals for yourself. And once you have been through the class, you could even go through all the live Q&As, join me for more Q&A time. And then if it's not right for you, just ask us for your money back. It's that easy. I would love to be here to help you take the guesswork out of this process so that you can enjoy flavorful food, tomatoes, pasta sauce, even when it's cold outside. All right. And also help you free up tons of time in this process, because I know how long it took me to get a system in place that worked. And I would love to just help you fast forward through that and take the quick path, right? So click on the register now button. And remember, these lessons are waiting for you now. That some of them are pre-recorded. They're ready to go. The bonuses are going to disappear very soon, those 3 bonuses that we talked about. So I want you to get started, prepare for that first live Q&A call with me. And I would love to have you join us in class. Join us. I look forward to seeing you there. Take care. And wherever you are, thank you for being part of the Homegrown Revolution. Love you guys.